I still remember that morning like it was yesterday, even though years have passed since then. The house smelled of fresh dead flowers and polished wood, the scent that always made weddings feel both exciting and suffocating at the same time. My daughter-in-law was bustling around, checking decorations, reminding my son to be on time, making sure the photographer arrived, and generally making everyone else feel like an afterthought. And in the middle of it all, I was standing quietly in the corner, holding a small gift, unsure if I even belonged there. I had tried to hide my emotions, tried to put on a cheerful face, but I could feel the weight of my son's eyes, scanning me in that way he had learned from his wife. That same look he used when he wanted to avoid confronting something unpleasant. I had spent 72 years learning people, reading them, knowing when their words were genuine and when they were armor hiding a blade. And in that moment, I saw the truth in him. "You're too old, too plain, too ugly," he whispered to me when no one else was listening. Not exactly in words loud enough for anyone else to hear, but in tone sharp enough to pierce straight through me. I felt my chest tighten. I tried to swallow, to keep the tears from coming, but the sting was immediate. All those years of love, support, late-night care, and worry for his happiness, reduced in his eyes to a comment about how I supposedly didn't fit his wedding day. I wanted to say something, to scream, to remind him of the nights I had spent sitting by his bed when he was sick, or the days I had skipped meals so he could have everything he wanted. But I knew that nothing I said would reach him. He was convinced of his own version of reality, the one where his mother was an inconvenience, a shadow, a relic he needed to overlook to have a perfect wedding. I stood back, letting the chaos of the day sweep over me, trying to calm the hurt that burned inside. And then I realized something. This wedding wasn't just his day. It wasn't just about him or my daughter-in-law, or the flowers and the cake and the photographer. It was my moment too. I would make him see me, even if only for a few seconds. I would make him remember me, not as someone ugly, unwanted, or invisible, but as his mother, the woman who had carried him, loved him, and shaped him into the man he was. And if he had to smile at me one last time, I would make sure it counted. As he passed by, adjusting his cufflinks and checking his reflection in the mirror, I stepped forward slowly. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw, the tiny frown that betrayed his stress. I knew he thought he could ignore me, but that wouldn't work. Not today. "Mom?" he said nervously, trying to glance at me without meeting my eyes directly. I smiled gently, holding his gaze. It wasn't a bitter smile, nor one filled with anger. It was soft, knowing, and layered with everything I had ever felt for him. I could see the surprise on his face. He hadn't expected this. No, he hadn't expected me. "I wanted to wish you happiness today," I said quietly, my voice steady even though my hands trembled slightly. "I want you to remember that the love that built this family started with me." He blinked, taken aback. For a moment, he didn't speak. The words had bypassed his carefully constructed armor, and something inside him shifted. He tried to turn away, to retreat, but I didn't let him. I reached out, placing my hand lightly on his arm, not demanding, not accusing, just connecting. And then it happened. That smile, the one he didn't even know he had left behind. A flicker of warmth, recognition, maybe even guilt, but most importantly, the realization that I was still his mother, still there, still proud of him despite everything. That smile, small and almost shy, was the last gift I would give him that day. Because in that moment, I understood something profound. I didn't need his love validated by words or public approval. I didn't need acknowledgement from anyone else. All I needed was this, the knowledge that even if he had tried to hide me, even if he had wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I had claimed my presence and I had made him smile. It was my quiet triumph, and it belonged entirely to me. I watched him walk toward the car with his bride, feeling the excitement of the day bubble around him. The chatter, the laughter, the cameras flashing, but inside I held my own memory. My smile, his fleeting recognition of me, and the knowledge that I had made him pause, just for a moment, to see the mother he thought he could ignore. That day, I learned that power doesn't always come in confrontation. Sometimes it comes quietly. Sometimes it's the ability to stand tall, to hold your head high, to give one small gift that leaves an imprint no one else can erase. And sometimes it comes from making someone smile for the very last time. And in that smile, I found my victory. The wedding day ended, the music faded, and the house slowly emptied. Everyone went their separate ways, laughing and chatting about the beautiful ceremony, the food, the decorations, the photos they'd all taken. And I sat quietly in the living room, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the echoes of the day. I wasn't sad, not entirely, but I was weary in a way that only comes after giving your heart fully and realizing how little it is appreciated. I remembered the smile I had received from my son, that fleeting acknowledgement that I existed. It was small, but it was enough to remind me that I could still leave an imprint on him, even if he had tried to pretend I didn't matter. And yet a quiet anger simmered inside me. He had called me ugly, tried to hide me, acted like I was irrelevant. I had held my tongue, held my pride, and allowed him to have his moment in the spotlight. But now, in the silence, I let my thoughts roam freely. I thought about my life, the years of sacrifice, the nights spent worrying, the mornings I woke before everyone else to prepare meals, pack lunches, and tie shoelaces. I had raised him with love and patience, never asking for much in return except respect. And now, in his attempt to erase me from his perfect day, I realized how little that respect mattered to him. That was when a thought struck me, sharp and clear. Respect isn't given, it's commanded by action. And I had action. The following days were filled with polite inquiries from relatives who had attended the wedding. "How is she?" they asked, assuming I would shrink into the background, remain humble and unnoticed. But I was far from invisible now. I had tasted the power of being seen, even briefly, and it awakened something in me. It was as if the smile I had forced him to give me had broken open a door inside me, one I didn't even know existed. I started small. I redecorated the living room, rearranged furniture, polished surfaces until they gleamed. I made the house feel like my sanctuary, a place where I belonged, not just a guest in my own home. I cooked meals not for approval, but for pleasure. For myself, tasting flavors I had forgotten to enjoy. I dressed in colors I loved, not those deemed acceptable by the eyes of my family. Slowly, I felt my confidence returning, like sunlight piercing through the clouds after a long storm. But life had a way of testing me. One afternoon, my son visited, accompanied by his new wife. They walked in with the assumption that everything had returned to normal, that I would smile politely, nod, and step aside. But I had changed. I met their eyes directly without flinching. There was no bitterness, no hatred, just clarity. "My home is mine," I said softly, and he stiffened. "And so is my presence here. I am not invisible, and I will not be ignored again." His wife opened her mouth, likely to argue, but I raised a hand and continued. "I am proud of you. I am proud of this day, and I am proud to have raised you. But I will not allow anyone to diminish me, not today, not ever again." A stunned silence fell over the room. My son avoided my gaze, fiddling with the cuff of his shirt. I could see the conflict in his eyes, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something like awe. I had spoken not with anger, but with certainty. And that was stronger than any scolding he could have imagined. In that moment, I realized that my victory did not come from him. My victory came from within me. I had taken back the control that he had tried to steal on his wedding day. I had reminded him, quietly, gently, powerfully, that I existed, that I mattered, and that his perception of me could never erase the decades of love and care I had poured into his life. The following weeks were even more enlightening. I started walking into rooms where I had once felt invisible, greeting relatives with a quiet authority. I laughed when jokes about my age or appearance were whispered behind my back, not because I agreed with them, but because I no longer needed their approval to validate my worth. And then came a day I hadn't expected. My son, the same one who had once called me ugly, asked me to help him with a small project at his new home. I watched him struggle, hesitating, unsure of what to do. And instead of stepping back, I walked forward. I guided him gently, showing patience, support, and care. And he smiled. Not the nervous, fleeting smile of the wedding day, but a genuine smile filled with gratitude and recognition. I felt a warmth inside me that no hurtful word could take away. I realized that the power of a mother is quiet but undeniable. Even when ignored, even when disrespected, our strength and wisdom endure. I had made him smile once before, yes, but this time it was different. This time, it was because he finally saw me, really saw me, not as someone to be hidden or ignored, but as a woman of strength, dignity, and love. And that I knew was only the beginning. Days passed, and life settled into a rhythm I had never experienced before. For years, I had lived in the shadows, always accommodating, always bending, always silent when my feelings were dismissed. But now, after the wedding day, after the fleeting smile I had made my son give me, I realized I could live differently. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel whole. I didn't need their permission to exist fully. One morning, as the sun filtered softly through the curtains, I sat in my favorite chair, sipping tea, and reflecting on everything that had happened. My home felt like mine for the first time in decades. I could rearrange the furniture, choose the music, decide the meals, all without anyone questioning me, without anyone whispering, without anyone assuming I didn't belong. That sense of ownership, of control over my own life, was intoxicating. And yet, the memory of that wedding day lingered. I thought about my son, about the way he had called me ugly, about the hurt that had pierced me so sharply. But more than that, I thought about the moment I had stood tall and reminded him that I existed, that my life mattered, that I had given him everything he had. I had made him smile then, not out of obligation, not out of politeness, but because I had chosen to remind him, softly, quietly, powerfully, that I was his mother. Weeks later, my son visited again. He approached me cautiously this time, a mixture of hesitation and respect in his steps. I didn't flinch or shrink away as I might have in years past. Instead, I met his gaze steadily, without bitterness, without reproach, just with clarity. He began and then stopped. His words faltered, but his eyes spoke volumes. For the first time, he realized I was no longer the silent, submissive woman he had tried to hide. I smiled softly. "You don't need to explain," I said. "I'm not angry anymore. I just want you to remember something important. Love is never measured by appearances or by convenience. It's measured by respect, care, and presence. That's what matters." He nodded slowly, a genuine understanding beginning to form. It was a small victory, but it meant more than any argument or confrontation could have. My power wasn't in forcing him to apologize. It was in showing him who I truly was and letting him choose to see it. Over the next few months, our relationship slowly shifted. He began to involve me in small things, asking for advice, seeking my opinion, not because he had to, but because he finally wanted to. There was no grand apology, no dramatic confrontation, but the silence between us was now filled with recognition. He saw me, he respected me, and in doing so, he honored the years of love and care I had poured into his life. I also noticed a change in myself. The woman who had once bent to every demand, who had silenced her own voice to avoid conflict, was now walking with quiet confidence. I didn't shout or demand acknowledgement. I simply existed fully in every space, in every interaction, without apology. And that, more than anything, brought me peace. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. One evening, my son and his wife invited me to dinner, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire for my company. As we sat around the table, laughter filling the room, I realized how far I had come. I had transformed from the woman who was too ugly to be seen into someone whose presence was now welcomed, whose wisdom and love were recognized. I caught my son's eyes across the table. There it was again, that small, shy smile, but this time it wasn't forced. It was real. He remembered the lesson, the moment I had made him smile years ago, and now he was smiling at me freely, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In that smile, I saw forgiveness, understanding, and the power of quiet strength. I realized that life isn't about forcing respect or proving yourself through confrontation. It's about standing tall, holding your dignity, and letting the world see who you are, fully, unapologetically. And I had done just that. I raised my teacup, acknowledging the journey, acknowledging the pain and the triumph, and silently thanking myself for every year of strength I had gathered. The woman who had once been dismissed and hidden was now fully seen. The mother who had been called ugly had reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her peace. Life, I understood now, is never about waiting for others to recognize your worth. It's about knowing it yourself, standing in it, and allowing the world to catch up. And in that quiet evening, surrounded by laughter and warmth, I finally felt free. I had made my son smile for the last time in a way that mattered, not just for him, but for me. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.